Hello. Try to listen this story closely.
In 2018, something strange began happening to a man named Daniel Carter. It wasn't a police case, it wasn't a scientific experiment, and it certainly wasn't supposed to become a story people would talk about. But over time, fragments of what happened began to surface. Phone records, audio files, and a phone that investigators later described as unusual. Because according to the call logs, Daniel Carter spent the last days of his life receiving phone calls from his own number, and the voice on the other end sounded exactly like him, just older. Daniel lived alone in a small house on the edge of town. His life was quiet and predictable. He worked remotely, rarely went out, and most evenings were spent in the same routine: dinner, a bit of television, scrolling through his phone. Nothing remarkable, nothing that suggested anything strange was about to happen. Until one night, his phone rang. It was around 11 in the evening. Daniel was sitting in the living room when his phone lit up. Unknown number. At first, he almost ignored it, but after a moment, curiosity got the better of him. He answered. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then he heard breathing, slow, tired, and then a voice spoke. Listen carefully, Daniel frowned. There was something strange about the voice. It sounded familiar, too familiar, almost like listening to a recording of himself. Who is this? Daniel asked. There was a pause. Then the voice said something strange. You have 5 minutes. And the call ended. Daniel stared at the phone for a moment. 5 minutes? For what? He shook his head and put the phone down. Probably a prank call, but exactly 5 minutes later, someone knocked on his door. Daniel froze. It was late, almost midnight. He slowly walked to the door and opened it. Standing there was his neighbor, a man Daniel barely spoke to. The neighbor looked slightly embarrassed. Sorry to bother you this late, he said. Do you happen to have a screwdriver? Daniel handed him the tool. The neighbor thanked him and walked away. And for a moment, everything seemed completely normal, except for one thing. The call had predicted it. The next night, the phone rang again. The same number. Daniel answered immediately. The voice returned. Calm. Quiet. Tomorrow morning you will drop your coffee. Daniel felt a strange chill run down his spine. And it will break. Who are you? Daniel asked. The line went silent. The call ended. The next morning, Daniel tried to ignore what had happened. He made coffee, sat down at the table, and tried to convince himself the call meant nothing. Then his phone vibrated on the table. Without thinking, he glanced at it. His elbow bumped the mug. The cup slid off the table and shattered on the floor. Daniel stared at the broken pieces for a long time. That wasn't a coincidence. After that, the calls kept coming, almost every night. Each time the voice warned him about something small. Don't take the highway tomorrow. Don't answer the call at 3:12. Don't walk through the park tonight. At first, Daniel didn't believe the warnings, but every time he ignored one, something strange happened. One evening, he drove on the highway despite the warning. Minutes later, a massive accident happened right in front of him. If he had been driving just a little faster, he would have been part of it. After that, Daniel stopped doubting the voice. The calls knew the future. Eventually, Daniel began recording the conversations. He needed proof, and he needed to understand who was doing this. But the recordings only made things stranger. Sometimes the voice sounded distorted, like pieces of sentences were missing, as if someone was struggling to speak. Other times, something even stranger happened. The voice sounded older, just slightly, but enough for Daniel to notice. Each new recording sounded like the same person. Years later. One night, the voice said something different. Something that made Daniel stop breathing for a moment. You have 3 days left. Daniel sat up. 3 days until what? Silence. Then the voice spoke again. Until you understand. That night, Daniel replayed every recording he had saved, again and again, until he noticed something disturbing. In one call, the voice said, "This is the 214th attempt." Daniel froze. Attempt? At what? Then the voice added something else. You always try to change the same night. Daniel began comparing their recordings more carefully, and then he noticed something impossible. In one audio file, the voice spoke a sentence that Daniel himself had said only minutes earlier. The same words, the same tone, the same voice. And suddenly, everything started to make sense. The voice on the phone was his own voice from the future. The third night arrived quietly. Daniel waited for the phone to ring, and eventually it did. He answered. For the first time, he didn't sound surprised. It's me, isn't it? The voice didn't answer right away. Then it finally said, You already know. Daniel took a slow breath. What happens tonight? There was a long pause. Then the voice replied softly, You tried to stop it. Again. Daniel asked the question that had been haunting him. Why doesn't it ever work? The voice answered immediately. Because the calls create the event. Silence filled the room. And yet, the voice continued, you keep calling. Daniel's voice shook slightly. If it never works, why do we keep doing this? For a long moment, the line was silent. Then the voice finally said, because one day, you might listen. That was the final recorded call. According to the records, Daniel Carter disappeared later that night. His phone was eventually recovered. Investigators found dozens of recordings and hundreds of outgoing calls. Every single one was made to the same number, his own. But the strangest detail was found in the call log. The final call had not happened yet. It was scheduled for the following night.
The last call is coming.